Welcome to SBC This Week, a weekly news roundup from the Southern Baptist Convention, as well as guest interviews from today's top church leaders. I'm Brandon Porter. Laura Erlinson is here with me. How are you today, Laura?
I am good. We survived tornadoes and all kind of stuff the last couple days.
Yeah, currently working through the flooding rains, and hopefully that will move on through our area here. Lots of folks affected by that in the Midwest and in the South this week. So it's something when, it's not just a story at Baptist Press for us. It's something that our families are trying to navigate through ourselves. So, absolutely.
It's been a little dicey here in Middle Tennessee this week.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so we're coming into Final Four. This is it. Honestly, it's kind of a sad time because it's the end of March Madness.
Yeah.
And, so especially
when Kentucky Wildcats are out too. Yeah.
Thanks for saying that. I was going to acknowledge that. I was going to say, especially when your team is not the one in the Final Four. So
yes,
but that's not true for you.
I don't know what that feels like right now. I'm good. My team is still in it. We'll see tomorrow night.
Yeah. Well, I can draw you a picture with a frowny face on it when we're finished with this, and you'll know what it feels like. So yeah. But lots of basketball to be played, important basketball to be played, because we have our bracket challenge at the EC. And I do think Dr. Orge is, he took Duke. And so
he's in first place in our, which I don't, he offered us all a trip to go to dinner somewhere. I don't know if he's just going to take himself to dinner, I guess. I'm in 7th place right now, but. Yeah. Well, you never know. Which isn't too shabby, It's not too shabby.
Yeah, you might make a run here, so we'll see. But, all right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about today. Major developments this week in the Johnny Hunt lawsuit against the SBC and Guidepost. We'll have some information about that in just a few moments. CP numbers for March are in. And Laura, we get the opportunity to talk with Scott Hildreth. He is one of the professors we have on missions at one of our Southern Baptist seminaries. And he'll be talking to us about a brand new book that he has on evangelism. And so all that's coming up here shortly on the podcast. First, though, we want to tell you that this podcast is sponsored by the Israel Ministry of Tourism. They are excited to launch a brand new video series. It's called Land of the Bible. It's a 52-episode journey through the central biblical and historical sites in Israel. So very wide-ranging, interesting documentary. The series invites viewers to explore the landscape, stories, and sacred heritage of the Holy Land, bringing the Bible to life in a powerful and visual way. It's created for a wide audience, for Bible readers, Christian travelers, those interested in archaeology, students of theology, anyone curious about the land where faith began, they say. Each episode features meaningful locations in Israel. The Land of the Bible series will premiere on the Ministry of Tourism's YouTube channel beginning, it premiered back March the 1st, so it's rolling. It's there if you want to grab it on demand. New episodes uploading weekly, 52 weeks, so Laura, it's all year long. Scripture and experience Israel come together in this video series. Again, you can find that channel at Go Israel Official, and you can begin your journey today. So make sure to check that out.
That sounds awesome. With Easter coming up, to watch those with your family. That's very cool. Yeah.
Next best thing maybe to actually getting to the land yourself. So, well, let's talk first off, Laura, about this federal lawsuit between Johnny Hunt and the SBC Guidepost Solutions and the Executive Committee. U.S. District Judge William Campbell made a significant ruling in that case this week.
Yeah, it was. I didn't know, wasn't expecting it. You just texted me one night earlier this week and said, "Hey, we got to put a story up. This just happened." And this is really good news for the SBC, for the Executive Committee, for Guidepost Solutions, who are all parties, defendants in this lawsuit. Basically, the judge issued summary judgment. And what that means is there really wasn't a dispute of the facts of the case. The judge said, in order for something to go to a jury, there has to be some kind of dispute about the facts of the case. And the judge essentially said, nobody disagrees of the material facts of this case. Both parties are essentially saying the same things. And so he, rather than going to a jury trial for the vast majority of the case, he issued a summary judgment and also declined to issue any damages because he said that hadn't been proven that those were warranted in this case. And so pretty significant ruling, like you say. There is still a part of the case that is still active, and that has to do with a tweet sent in 2022 from then President Bart Barber, who is still a party in the case, and that evidently, as of right now, is still will go to a jury at a trial that is set to begin in mid-June, right after the annual meeting. So, of course, we'll be continuing to follow that and any developments that happen between now and then.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had several stories on that. So if you haven't read those stories, we'd encourage you to go to Baptist Press and you can get the details there on those stories. All right, let's shift now. Let's go to Dallas and annual meeting preparations. Full speed ahead this week, Laura. The SBC Resolutions portal. It opened this week. And so we are now receiving resolutions for folks who want to submit those.
Yeah, the word portal seems to come up every day now in various contexts. But yeah, the resolutions portal is open, and Andrew Walker is the chairman of the committee this year, no stranger to Baptist Press and to this podcast. He said that the resolutions offer a unique opportunity to speak with biblical clarity and conviction on the pressing cultural matters of our day. And they serve as a witness to the hope that we have in Christ. And so he said, in a world often marked by confusion and despair, our resolutions not only reflect our deeply held beliefs, but must also shine with the truth and beauty of the gospel. And I know there have been calls maybe over the past 2 or 3 years to do away with resolutions. Are they necessary? It seems like they just cause more drama and more controversy than unity. But I think Andrew makes a good point because it's helpful not just now to speak to the culture and to speak even to fellow Southern Baptists and sort of unify, this is what we believe. But it also speaks to generations down the line. I can't tell you how many times I have to go back, or just for my own curiosity, want to go back and look at resolutions that were adopted decades ago and see where was the culture at that time, where were Southern Baptists at the time. And I think it's very helpful and needed to make these kinds of statements. And so, yeah, that portal is open, and you have until before May 22nd. So I guess midnight, May 22nd, right after the stroke of midnight. It's too late, but as long as it's before that, you have time to get those resolutions submitted.
Yeah, absolutely. SBCannualmeeting.net. You can find the portal there, be able to submit those resolutions. Another piece of information related to the annual meeting. This week, we learned that Don Currents will be nominated once again as SBC Registration Secretary.
Mayor, Mr. Mayor of Ozark, Missouri, and executive pastor of First Baptist Church there in Ozark, Missouri, or administrative pastor, I should say.
All right, so Laura, as we transition out of annual meeting news, we want to come to the CP numbers. We mentioned those earlier. CP receipts were 3.3% below budget halfway through the fiscal year because of giving in the month of March. That was 2.43% below the budget goal in March.
Yeah, this is like the third maybe month in a row that we've had lower numbers, lower than the budget.
Right.
And so as of right now, we're halfway through the fiscal year, and we're like you said, 3.3% below where we would like to be, where we anticipated being at this point halfway through the fiscal year. I'm hopeful. I think just here in the last couple of weeks, we've had stories about the DOJ dropping its investigation into the SBC. We've had now this story this week about the Hunt lawsuit being essentially over, at least for the time being, the vast majority of it. And so I feel hopeful that people will realize, we've kind of come through a rough patch here, but the Cooperative Program has served us well for 100 years. And we're going to celebrate that together here in a couple of months in June in Dallas. I'm really looking forward to that. Even this morning, we were talking about some of the things that are ready to go for the booth in Dallas to celebrate and educate people about the Cooperative Program. And it's really cool stuff. And so I think I'm just hopeful that even though we have kind of been down these last 2 or 3 months, the news has been nothing but good when it comes to the Cooperative Program. And so I feel like that'll be encouraging to people, and we'll see those numbers coming back up. pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Pivot to a different piece of information here. South Carolina megachurch has withdrawn from the SBC this week. New Spring Church, which has more than 14,000 members across 13 campuses in South Carolina, has decided that they are going to withdraw from the SBC. Now, that's not something we normally report on at Baptist Press or necessarily on this podcast, but this one in particular we want to draw your attention to because back in February, the Credentials Committee had a statement from the Credentials Committee was released on social media. It was actually a dialogue between the person who had asked a question about this church, and it got leaked out onto social media. And the issue at hand was a woman who was a staff member that did teaching, preaching ministry in the church. She didn't serve as a pastor or an elder necessarily of the church, but she was functioning in the role of preaching in the church. And so the Credentials...
She did have teaching pastor. That was her title. Yeah, her title.
Yeah. And so the Credentials Committee had taken a look at it and gone through a process, and they chose not to take action. And that caused Southern Baptists to ask some questions about it, going so far as SBC President Clint Presley asked the committee to take another look. He said he thought that was warranted because the statement of faith is clear. The Baptist faith and message is clear about the qualifications for a pastor, he said. And so rather than continuing through that process, New Spring Church just decided to withdraw from the SBC. And so you might remember when that happened back in February, we did have a story about the fact that the so-called law amendment, there is preparations for it to be brought back to the floor at the annual meeting and to be discussed again and then potentially voted on. So anyway, this church has triggered a bigger discussion than just this church concerning the role of women in preaching ministry in the SBC, which is not a new issue. We've been dealing with that for the last few years. And so anyway, just wanted to bring that back to you here.
Yeah, like you're right. We wouldn't normally, churches, when they withdraw from the SBC for all kind of various reasons, we wouldn't necessarily always write a story about those. But this one was significant because it had kind of sparked a discussion and also was probably going to come up at the annual meeting potentially, and so it kind of rose to the level of people need to know about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a huge church, 13
It is
campuses,
a very, very big church in South Carolina. So more details, obviously, at baptistpress.com. So check it out. All right. Myanmar, Laura, suffered just a significant earthquake about a week ago. A week ago today, as we record this on Friday, April the 4th. On Friday, March the 28th, a 7.7 magnitude earthquake rocked the nation of Myanmar and also affected Thailand. I checked today, over 3,000 people now have died. And I'm sure there are just thousands more who have been injured, and who knows, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, affected by the disaster itself. And so just a lot of devastation there. We bring that up not just as a point of prayer for you, but to also bring awareness to you that Send Relief is there. And Send Relief is in the midst of providing relief for those folks affected by that.
And I thought this was really a powerful aspect of this, is that there had fairly recently been disaster relief training in Thailand provided by Send Relief and the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Disaster Relief, who we have talked about a lot on this podcast after the wildfires in Maui a few years ago, and so they have recently been in Thailand providing that training that is now being used, and so it's just a picture of Southern Baptists cooperating. Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. All right. This week, a group of ethnic SBC fellowships issued a joint statement on immigration. Laura, as you know, that's in the news quite a bit recently as the Trump administration takes some action toward trying to secure the borders and shoring up legal immigration, considering policy changes and adaptations to refugee policy. All kinds of things are happening there. And so this group of SBC leaders joined together. The signers of the statement said they share the sentiment that the federal government's desire to protect citizens, to promote legal immigration and refugee policies, while at the same time They also want, robustly for them to safeguard the country's borders. But as that enforcement goes into a place, they wanted to make sure that it must be accompanied with compassion that doesn't demonize those fleeing oppression, violence, and persecution. And so the statement was shared with Baptist Press by Bruno Molina, who is the executive director of the National Hispanic Baptist Network, also a signatory to that letter. Just a number of different nationalities, ethnicities signing on to that letter, Laura.
Yeah, some of those groups are the Haitian Baptist Fellowship, Hispanic, African American, Chinese, Filipino, Nigerian, Liberian, Ghanaian, Korean, Burmese, Thai, and Vietnamese Baptist fellowships. All, or at least some of those groups or representatives from those groups signed on to this statement. And those fellowships represent nearly 11,000 Southern Baptist churches. And so a pretty big group who, like you say, are saying, we agree with the call for legal immigration. We agree with the call to secure the borders. We just would like to see it handled this way. And so, if I would encourage people to go read the letter and check out that information.
So some news also on the religious liberty front this week, Laura, as Georgia becomes the 30th state to pass the Religious Freedom Restoration Bill. As of our recording today, that bill is waiting the signature of the governor there in Georgia, but I think folks believe he's going to do that. No problem at all. It passed largely along party lines with Republican support just 2 days after the legislation, or 2 days before the session ends there in Georgia. That is the same bill that it was begun by President Clinton back in 1993. As we said, over these years, 30 states have ratified it. And the folks there at the Georgia Baptist Mission Board have been very involved in the ratification of this act.
Yeah, Diana Chandler, who wrote this story, had a great interview with Mike Griffin, the public affairs representative there with Georgia Baptist. And it's been more than 10 years that the Georgia Baptist Mission Board has been fighting for this. And so they are celebrating that they finally got this done in Georgia. And I love what he said. He said the RFRA is not a sword, it's a shield. I think it gets portrayed that it's going to be used to discriminate or attack certain groups. And he's really saying, no, this is just to protect people of all faiths, not even just Christians, people of all faiths, to be able to practice their faith in the workplace or just in the public square. And so it is not trying to weaponize people of faith to attack other people. It's about making sure people of faith are protected from the government, local and state ordinances, or laws that infringe on their rights.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Pretty good news in Georgia.
Definitely. All right. We always like to mention first persons when we have just some that we want to make sure that you don't miss. And we had two this week that Laura,
two good
I thought really fit in that category. One was about the forgotten role of Sunday schools in church planting, and we'd love for you to go check that one out. And then another one was on cooperation as a Southern Baptist distinctive. And so those are both at Baptist Press, and we'd love for you to go read those. I think they'll give you something to think about for sure. All right, Laura, so we're going to get to this interview with Scott Hildreth now. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and we're glad to have him on SBC This Week. Well, Scott, thanks so much for joining us on SBC This Week.
Thanks so much, man. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you introduce yourself to folks just a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm Scott Hildreth. I'm professor of missiology at Southeastern Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. I have been here. This is my 17th or 18th year here. Before that, my wife and our two kids spent time overseas with the International Mission Board. We lived in Berlin, Germany. We lived in Istanbul, Turkey. Did that for about a decade, 3 terms with the IMB. So really been involved in missions, evangelism, training people for that type of ministry. Yeah, for over 2 decades. And really enjoy what we do here. Again, I teach missions here. I'm an elder at the Summit Church. My wife is on staff at the Summit Church. And so we're kind of neck deep in what the life is like here and that type of thing. I have two kids. My daughter has 3 kids. So I have 3 grandkids. Which are much better than having children, by the way, if you haven't gotten there yet.
I'm not there yet. Yeah, looking forward to it. Well, we want to dive in just a little bit to a brand new book that you have called Evangelism and Missions. And
That's right.
so I skimmed through it and pulled out some questions that I thought these questions would be questions, A, that would be helpful to people maybe who haven't read the book yet, and then B, would encourage folks to go read the book. And so,
Sure.
so here we go. You can tell me how I did when we get on the other side of it. All right. So being that this is SBC this week, I thought it was important to start with William Carey, since you mentioned him in the beginning of the book. And, lots of folks are familiar with him if they're listening to this podcast, but you make an interesting connection. You talk about how the times of William Carey, there are some similarities in the modern age. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, William Carey is a British pastor and is really consumed with the needs around the world. Is obviously no internet, no, anything like that news, but he becomes aware of lostness in the world. And he preaches this very famous sermon called An Inquiry into the Obligation to Use Means for the Conversion of the Heathen. So the emphasis there is that Christians have to do something about all the lost people. And we look back at that sermon as the kind of the beginning or the launching point for the modern missionary movement. But we missed the part that William Carey's sermon was really countercultural among the churches of his time. In fact, when he finished that sermon, a man in the back of the room stood up and said, "Young man, you sit down. When God wants to convert the heathen, he'll do it without my help or yours." You see, their whole church kind of theological tradition, is hyper-Calvinism, was anchored in this notion that God would do what he wanted to do, and we just needed to almost sit back and let God do his thing. And then, without our help or anything. So Carey was really emphasizing this in his sermon. And as I look at the world today and I think about where we are in the church, I see a lot of similarity in the attitudes of people in our churches who have become in some ways so consumed with the crisis of the moment, political crisis, cultural crisis, or become so kind of enamored in our own self-interest, or even turning some mission opportunities into nothing but political check marks, then we kind of sit back as if to say, if God wants to do this, he can do it without me. I have a different agenda and a different plan. And what I want to say is Carey's sermon is still significant, that the Great Commission calls us to use means to do something. It requires me, you, anyone who calls on the name of Jesus to take proactive steps to see that people who need Jesus hear about him. To sit back and just assume that God will take care of things on his own, in Carey's words, it's to be disobedient to the Great Commission. Unfortunately, I see some similarities today in some of our churches in the last several years.
Now, you used the word call there a couple of times, and that's just a great transition to something else I wanted to talk about. You unpack the word calling in the book. Let's talk about that for just a minute, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. When we think about calling, calling is it's both a spiritual term. We use it in church a lot, but it's also become very popular in culture. You see a person who, is a good musician or a good athlete, and they say, "Man, this guy's a calling, to be a football player, basketball player." What we mean in this cultural sense is that this guy has a passion, and he basically pulls himself up, or she pulls herself up, and she pursues this. But the momentum for that, or the initiator, is the person themselves. But from a Christian perspective, when we think about calling, we mean that there's somebody doing the call, right? God himself calls us, and we answer, we respond to that divine call in our lives. And God works in us, not because we're worthy, not because we're passionate, not because have anything to offer, but because in the sense of his calling, by his power, by his grace, he's the one who makes us competent to pursue that call. And in that, then it works through our walk with Jesus. It works through the body of Christ, confirming in us, this is something I see in you. I have students all the time, God, Hildreth, I need to know what God has called me to do. And so I ask a series of questions. What leads you to this point? And it's typically some internal drive, some awareness of a need, whether it's lostness or the church needs musicians or the church needs a good Bible teacher. And then I stress, well, that's good. What else is leading you to this? And then what we see in the Bible is there's this external conviction. Others are saying to you, hey, I think you can do this. And have you considered this? Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you just going through life on your own and somebody says, you're a really good counselor. When I have a need, I come to you. Have you ever thought about being a Christian counselor? No, then the light comes on. And then we have this experiential affirmation. When we do it, we kind of feel almost like, Eric Little, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And so the one who's called to say missionary service or to be a pastor, when they serve in that arena, they feel God's pleasure. No, this is where God is leading me. But again, from a Christian perspective, calling the initiator of that is outside of us, and he makes us worthy to accomplish that task, which is, again, it's completely backward of the way most people in our contemporary society use that term.
And so I'm going to come back to that in just a minute.
Okay.
Now let's start connecting it a little bit more in the calling that we all have received from Jesus in the Great Commission. And so before we respond in obedience to that, many times we need to realize the need for that. And you spend some time in the book talking about that, just the recognition of the need to share the gospel, the fact that there are those who have never heard it, or those who are misunderstanding it, or those who are being influenced by other religions. And I think sometimes we do dismiss and think that the missionaries are taking care of that, or the pastor is taking care of that, rather than, there's a need in my neighbor and, my coworker and the other parent on the Little League team. Talk a little bit about that, on that need for the gospel that's all around us that we tend to miss so often.
Yeah. I'm always amazed when I take some of our students on, say, a short-term mission trip. And it's almost like the moment they get on the airplane, the switch flips, and now every person they see is in need of the gospel. I have been with students who sit in the airport for 2 hours thinking like comfortable in my own context, get on the airplane, share the gospel with somebody they've been in the airport with for 2 hours, but something about that flips a switch in their mind. And we often think that way, Brandon. We think that that lostness is over there. It's part of this special moment or encounter. If I end up in a Buddhist culture, or end up in a Hindu culture, Muslim context, okay, that's where lost people are. But without appreciating that, the Bible says that all are sinners and all have fallen short of the glory of God. And the consequences of that lostness and the consequences of that sin are just as significant for my neighbor or the person I go to the gym with as they are for the person on the other side of the world. And I have a responsibility to share the gospel with those people as well. I think sometimes we fool ourselves into thinking that the people close to us they may just be a little bit off. Okay, they don't go to church, but they're not really lost, like this person who worships another god or something. But the Bible won't allow us to be comfortable with that. The Bible's very clear that all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. But people can't call on the name of the Lord unless someone tells them. And we are his vessels for telling them. Now, we add to that what we all know is the reality of the world we live in today, and that's the massive migration that's taking place, where people are coming from unevangelized countries, unreached countries to the United States, whether they're international students and they come looking for work, or other countries. And these are people who we would have very difficult times maybe getting there as a missionary, but now they're here. We have every opportunity to share the gospel with people. And I think this is another sense of we can't just relegate that to those who are overseas, those who are there, when God has brought the nations to us, and many of these are coming from unreached, unengaged people groups.
Yeah, very good. Well, I can't help but believe that, you're not just a missions professor, you're also a missions strategist. That has to creep in there because you're passionate about the gospel and you're passionate
Sure.
about the need of the lost and for all to hear the gospel. And so something that you do that's really interesting, and I want to kind of end on this in the book, is you encourage people to develop a personal missions strategy. I've heard, state conventions come alongside of a church and help a church develop a mission strategy. Honestly, that was kind of that was a neat concept to think about a personal mission strategy. Share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, the idea is that we, I say all the time, tell my students, I say, look, anybody who's ever taken a shower has had a good idea. It's what you do after you get out of the shower that turns that idea into something meaningful. And we read a book on missions, and the book itself is kind of a meditation on the Great Commission, taking each of these phrases. And what I didn't want to happen and don't want to happen is for someone to read the book and get to the end and think, but this was great. This was motivating. This was inspiring. Without putting some real planning behind it. And the only thing this personal mission strategy is a series of 3 or 4 or 5 steps to think, who am I? Where has God placed me? Who has God placed around me who need to hear about Jesus? And then to think, when will I see them again? And as I see them again, how can I pre-plan this conversation? Or what do I think their need is for the gospel? What's their question? What's the thing that stands in the way of them trusting Jesus, rather than just being haphazard? Again, we go back to William Carey's sermon, right? We use means for the proclamation of the gospel to those who need to hear it. And this personal mission strategy is just taking, on a personal level, again, what churches or other organizations would do on a larger scale. It begins obviously when we see ourselves as God's missionary representatives where he places us. And then we think, okay, how do I think like a missionary right here? So what the book is hoping to do is giving every Christian the tools to live, to think, to pray like a missionary where God has placed them. And if God takes them overseas, they'll continue to do there what they've developed the skills to do in their own backyard.
Uh-huh. What's something that this will be our last word here? What's something that maybe you learned from writing the book?
Yeah, the thing that really, as I was working through the book, it really was this William Carey moment, right? As I was trying to think, how do you start the book off? And wanted to grab this, hey, this is a good point. And then it dawned on me, man, when we think about our current setting, I'm so concerned about the state of our churches, our SBC churches, evangelical churches at large, but specifically those within our own denomination, those who have become so distracted by things taking place around them. Obviously, we look at Baptist press or whatever, we can see all the distraction that can take place, right? Have become so distracted that we've minimized God's missionary call and the Great Commission, and we put other things in its place, as if being faithful in those areas is a reason to not be faithful into this one, and just say, God, you take care of that. We'll take care of, you name whatever that other thing is. And it was really this idea of, man, the church is always fighting this battle of the thing that would distract us from the main thing, which is the proclamation of the gospel. I've got a statement in here that where I say, I'm afraid that many of us have been like Esau, that we've sold our birthright for the felt need of the world around us. And that birthright is the proclamation of the gospel to those who are lost. Jesus gave us that mandate. We're stewards of the gospel. And so as I worked through kind of the notion of the book, that just kept coming back, and that became the reverberating thing. How do you wake up a sleeping giant and say, hey, this is what God has called us to, and let's not walk away from it.
That's great. Thanks so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate you talking to me.
I really appreciated Scott. I appreciate him being on the podcast with us. I loved what he had to say about calling and just how it doesn't, I feel like that can be kind of a mysterious word for a lot of people. And maybe they don't they've said, well, I've never felt that. I've never felt anything mystic, and so maybe I'm not called to do anything. But I love that he just was real practical. And if it's something that you enjoy, something that you're good at, and something that other people say, hey, you're good at that. You should think that. That's really what it is. And that was helpful for me even as a young person. I had a couple people share that with me. Hey, you're good at this. You should try this ministry, or you should look into that. And it really doesn't mean that you have to only listen to other people, but that could just be such a good confirmation for you if you're kind of, especially like an analytical left brain kind of person, that it doesn't have to be this sort of life-changing mystical experience to have a calling. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's definitely true, Laura. I know that section of the book and then that section of the conversation was really helpful to me as we thought about calling. And, you can't help but read that or hear somebody talk about that and just reflect on your own life and consider that for yourself. So we're glad to have the opportunity to talk to Scott. Hope that was helpful to you all as well as you joined in with us on that conversation. Just a couple of things in our SBC emphasis calendar that we want to point out to you. One of those being that we are in the Annie Armstrong Easter offering season, now just a couple of weeks away from Easter Sunday. And so hopefully you and your church are invested in that and are talking about it and sharing about it on a regular basis here during this time frame. And then the Sunday following that, Laura, is April the 27th, which is Baptism Sunday. And I want to share that with you as well, to be thinking about that and how you could, just be praying that the Lord would move and would draw people to himself and would bring them to faith. And who knows, maybe on that Baptism Sunday they would be baptized. And then the week after that, Laura, the first week of May, is the National Day of Prayer, falls during that week. And so prayer emphasis coming just right after that. So some busy weeks here as we head on into April and in May. All right.
Yeah, a lot going on.
Absolutely. And there always has been a lot going on. And that's what you're going to tell us about right now in the history moment.
That is true. Okay. The dateline for this, issue of Baptist Press was April 10th, 1950. But the story down in this issue was from April 1st. April 1st, 1950.
Okay.
So 75 years ago. 1950, Headquarters Hotel, largest in convention. Okay, this is so great. This is so fun. For the first time in the history of the Southern Baptist Convention, the headquarters for the annual meeting will be in the largest hotel in the world and the largest city in the convention, which at the time was Chicago. Apparently there were the churches in Chicago, and that was the largest city in the Southern Baptist Convention. It was the Hotel Stevens in Chicago.
Okay.
It has 36 floors, 30 above ground and 6 below. It would take one person 8 hours a day for 30 days to visit for 5 minutes in each of the 3,000 rooms. There are 40 miles of carpet in the hotel, 3,000 employees, including 70 telephone operators.
Wow, how about that?
The hotel dining room uses every day a ton of butter, 1,000 dozen eggs, 10 steers. That's a lot of steak and hamburgers, a ton of pork and fish, 20,000 hot rolls, a ton and a half of potatoes, 25 cases each of oranges, lettuce, celery, and tomatoes, and 35,000 cups of coffee, which for Southern Baptists might be more like 50,000. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, wow.
So this hotel at the time, the largest in the world, the elevator was 10 feet high, 10 feet wide, and 29 and a half feet long. There were 75 elevator operators for 25 elevators that carry 107,000 people each and every day up and down the elevators. The hotel had its own fire department, its own medical department, and washed 15,000 sheets every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
So now, I looked it up. So the Stevens Hotel still exists. Conrad Hilton bought it in 1946. It would have to be, I guess he didn't change the name of it until after, because I think I read that he bought it in 1946. Yeah.
Okay.
And this was 1950. So apparently he already owned it in 1950, but he just hadn't changed the name of it yet. Now it is a Hilton Hotel. It still exists in Chicago. It's a Hilton. And I looked up also The current largest hotel in the world is in Malaysia, and it
Mm.
has over 7,000 rooms.
Mm.
This one had 3,000 at the time. It was the largest in the world. The Opryland Hotel here in Nashville, I looked that up too. It has over 3,000 rooms.
Interesting.
So it's now bigger than this one was in 1950. That was biggest in the world at the time.
Yeah.
But I just thought, how fun that Southern Baptists got to stay at this hotel in Chicago in 1950 that was the biggest in the world.
Yeah.
And have one of, thousands of cups of coffee served every day.
Mm. It would be interesting to know how many people stayed in that hotel, and there were more rooms in that hotel than there were people back at home where they were coming from.
Yeah, that's
Probably
a good point.
Lots and lots and
Probably
lots of
lots
folks.
of people from these little towns that came to that hotel and had. Yeah, that's a good point. And probably lots of Southern Baptists stayed, at a hostel down the street and just came back because they couldn't afford to stay at that fancy hotel. But,
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How about
the meeting, that was the Convention Hotel in 1950.
1950. Yeah. Okay. So when they were celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Cooperative Program.
That's right. Good point. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they did celebrate it. I don't know.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, neat story there. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of information this week. And I tell you what, as we were compiling the list of stories, there were, Laura, just several that I thought this could be included, maybe this should be included, but for the sake of time, we're just going to point people to the website and ask them to go check it out on their own.
Yep, that's getting to be more and more the case as we head into convention. There's stuff every week that people need to know. So as always, you can find all that you need to know, and even some stuff you might want to know, like the biggest hotel in the world, stuff like that, at baptistpress.com. Thanks for listening.